Hi everyone, this is Mehul Mehta and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So for today's podcast, we have very special guest. We have Dimitri Bianco. So welcome Dimitri, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to come back on.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. So just for audience in this podcast, we are gonna talk about rankings of different, I guess there are different universities and there are certain rankings associated to all these different universities. So if you are planning to pursue a master's either in quant finance, financial engineering, mathematical finance, I guess this is a must-watch podcast because I'm gonna ask bunch of questions with Dimitri, and I guess Dimitri also has a lot of things to share. So first of all, thank you so much, Dimitri, for joining in today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We've been on your channel a few times,
Yeah,
and then you asked me, I don't know, it's been like a month, and
yeah,
then I had vacation and things have happened. But as of, you asked, can you talk about the rankings? Can you talk about your rankings? In my head, I've been like building out, like, "Oh, I need to make sure I hit these topics and these points." So
right.
I'm excited to kind of go through this today and talk a little bit more about the rankings, especially since QuantNet just came out. I don't know, was it 2 days ago? Something like
Yeah,
that, a few days ago.
yeah, right. That's right. That's right. A few days ago, I also saw the rankings. So I'm just curious. First of all, like, what do you think about ranking in general? Like, just because some university they are on top, some university are on the bottom. Do you think is ranking a good criteria, or like just a honest feedback from your side?
No. So I think there's a few things you need to think about. And I think students don't think about this because you're a student, like you're not in the industry and you're not going to realize this until you graduate. But the rankings don't mean anything, which blows people's minds. Some of the best programs in the country aren't even listed on QuantNets, risk.nets. They're not listed anywhere because they just don't care,
Mm,
uh, which is an interesting thing, which we can get into. But I think part of this too is looking at like what is your goal as a student and what is your background. And I
okay.
think that's the difference between, again, looking at like what is the goal of that ranking? Like what is QuantNet's goal? What is Risk.net's goal? What is Dimitri's goal? Like what are we getting at?
Right.
And even I've had programs I've invited to come on my ranking say like he's got to be getting something out of this. Like what are you getting out of this? And I'm like I'm making a YouTube video which
Yeah.
pays me, a couple bucks. Like it's not a get rich quick scheme and they don't want to participate. They feel like there's like an I gotcha moment, like I'm trying to get them on something.
Right.
But I think looking at this from a perspective of what is the goal and what is your background.
Mhm.
So let's just take two examples here, right? Let's say you're a business finance undergrad, commerce, as they call it internationally, um, and you want to apply to a program and you want to get into quantitative finance, and you're so excited to get into the industry. And then on the other side of this, you have let's say, like an applied math undergrad, let's say both equally good schools, which program should you go to? It's going
Mm,
to be completely different for both students because your educational backgrounds are completely different. And so I think students miss that when you're looking to apply to a program is are the programs tailored to train finance students, which is my background's in finance. It was an awful experience going through quantitative finance, right? You're having to learn all the math, all the stats from essentially the ground up because you probably haven't taken calculus,
right.
Calc 2, Calc 3 in 2, 3, 4 years. Like I haven't even looked at math when I graduated. And then you look at like an engineering student or an applied math student, right? They've been taking math every single course for the last 2 years out of their 4 year undergrad, but they have no idea what finance is.
Mm,
And so I think when you start to look at these programs, like the best program, like saying this is the best program, it's like for who? Like who is this the best program for? Because I can tell you from the list of the top 10 on QuantNet, probably three or four of them I would never hire from. And it's because I understand the programs, I understand the curriculum, I understand what their goals are. And it's not necessarily that it's a bad program. It just doesn't align with what I hire for or what my team does. And so I think part of that needs to be thought about of how you go through the process. Like, what is the actual goal of the student? Um, what blows most people's minds is most of the programs cannot tell me what their goal is. I'll ask them, like, what is your goal? Like, what do you, and they go, quantitative finance.
yeah, I know, I know. Yes, that's correct. I mean, yeah, that's on point because I know a lot of people who transition from BCom or people coming from commerce background to quant finance, and they feel extremely challenging because they have never studied calculus, never studied linear algebra, probability theory, and in the very first semester, you see all the bombs dropping off, and what's going on? I understand. Yeah, that's a great point, Dimitri. So like, so what's your take? Because I see lot of universities, mostly Ivy League. I guess their fees are very close to $100,000.
Hmm.
People coming from India, students coming from India and all these different countries, China. I know people from Pakistan. A lot of people from Pakistan reach out to me, and we take like education loan, and we all come from a middle class family. We are not like richy rich or something. We come
Yeah.
from a very decent families, middle class families. We take a good amount of loan, and just imagine like $100,000 is just the education fee. On top
Hmm.
we take like loan which is again 10 to 12%, because I guess the loans in US it's like it's lesser, 4 to 5% interest rates.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah, but in India it's like 12%, and if you do not have collateral it will go much higher. So what do you think, does it make sense to go to Ivy League? I mean, just want to understand from your mindset, like what's your take on like how students should think? I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a few things you should consider. I think one, figuring out what you want to do, which I know students don't know,
Mhm.
right? Because we could even talk about what is quantitative finance and
Yeah.
how do you define that and who do you talk to about that? But I think most students have like an idea, right? You have an idea of I want to be a trader. I want to do quant dev, or I want to do quantitative research or model development. You have some sort of idea in your head. I think one of the key takeaways I tell students is I'm like, reach out to the programs and see like where they're placing students if that information is available.
Mhm.
Now, I would argue the best programs or some of the better programs will actually provide that for free on their websites already because they're
Mhm.
not hiding anything, right? There's a whole list like Carnegie Mellon. I love working with Carnegie Mellon. They have this amazing report. And it's like, I think Baruch has a report too, but you can go online, you can download the report, and you can see like where they're placing the graduates. So you can say, okay, I want to do, model development at a bank like Demetri on the sell side. And you go and you look, and it's like, jump trading or like two sigmas, and you're like, okay, really cool jobs, but that's not what I want to do. And you can figure out where they're going to be placing the graduates. I
Mhm.
think that's a first step of figuring out like if the program's even going to place you where you want to be placed.
Mhm.
Because, I mean, programs specialize in different things.
Right.
Uh, they have good networks for hiring. So that's one piece. The other piece, looking at the prerequisites,
Mhm.
because some schools, so how to break all these out. Business schools want work experience, which I think is stupid because it's an MBA. It's not an actual quant degree typically. And so it's great you have experience working at, I don't know, some consulting firm or PwC, but that's not real quant experience. So it doesn't really add any value. But looking at that too, at the prerequisites, like what are the prerequisites? If you need work experience and you have that, you're going to have a leg up because you're already going to have the base requirements. If you're a finance student and you're applying to like Michigan, for example, Michigan wants this crazy list of math courses. Like you had to have taken, I think, real analysis is one of them. And so it's like some math students or specifically like engineering students who've taken a bunch of math perhaps skated around real analysis because it's a hard class. It's going to ruin your GPA. And so I think as you start to kind of look at programs, I would start to at least just start weeding out based on what the programs have, what are the requirements, and then where are they going to be placing students. And I
Mhm.
would ignore the fact of Ivy League. It doesn't mean anything in quant finance, which is I think people find odd. Like Baruch, for example, like most people, I don't know if anyone knows this internationally. Baruch is what's like a city school. So
Mhm.
it's not even like a big name state school, like University of Michigan, University of Washington, University of Texas. I don't know, some other big names that aren't used. But they're big state schools and they're really good schools. And then you have Baruch, which is like a rinky-dink city school who everybody knows is like an awful school in general. Like quality's not great. But their quant finance program is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's like they've brought in, again, industry practitioners. They've really made this amazing program. And so I think Baruch's one of the good examples of like the branding itself, going to Harvard, Yale, MIT, Princeton, doesn't really mean anything in the quant space if you're not in trading. So perhaps if you go down the trading path, so again, doing your research, most traders are not quants. I know people are going to cringe when I say that. It doesn't matter. You're not a quant, you're doing trading. And when you look around the room and everyone's from an Ivy League school, you realize they're there because they're smart people, which is the whole purpose of Ivy Leagues, this, filter out really smart people. They hire smart people, which is great. But as you probably know, I don't know if you agree or not, but when you do something like stochastic calculus or even like, high amounts of like I don't know, statistical modeling, even simple things like linear regression. They're hard things to teach to people that don't have that background.
Yep.
And so,
Yep.
like, I've tried to teach an information sciences graduate, I think 8 years, 9 years in banking. He wanted to come to the quant team, and one of our colleagues is like, "I'll train him." And I was like, "Don't do it. Like, don't do it. It's not going to end well." And he took on this goal of for the year he was going to train him and they're going to transition him. And the guy training him was top notch, like one of the best in the industry. In 12 months, I think it was like we're getting close to annual reviews, and he's like, my annual review is going to be awful. He's like, I couldn't train him. He's like, I tried so hard, and the other individual tried really hard, but there's such a big gap in the education piece that I think a lot of people miss that. That's like the hard piece to make up. And so I would ignore the university names. I don't think they mean that much. But I'd look at, for example, what are they teaching? Where are they placing students? The other piece is going to be location. So this is kind of what we were talking about too, right? Location does matter.
Yep.
You could start the world's worst quant finance masters and put it in New York City, and you will get some job placement because it's easy to interview. Like your students can be out for coffee and run into somebody from a big firm and then start talking about. I mean, I lived in Weehawken, New Jersey in my apartment building, and the students walking with the blue and yellow Shreves books for stochastic calculus.
Okay.
Right. And I'm working in the industry and I stopped the student. I'm like, are you like a financial engineering student? And he's like, yeah, I go to Stevens. And I was like, really? I was like, well, I graduated from University of Michigan. I'm like telling him my story. And it's like, we just run into each other because we're in New York City.
Right.
I've never had that happen in Dallas. Like, right?
Yeah.
I've done quant meetups. I've had books, never been recognized. Oddly enough, in New York City, I've been recognized by two random people on the street that just walked up and were like, "Are you Dimitri Bianco from, YouTube?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." But I think those sort of natural interactions occur regardless of the program. So being in like New York, Chicago, um, even North Carolina. So as you probably know, huge, huge credit card market. Like every single credit card companies in Raleigh area, you've got, Discover, Capital One, even all the banks that are all located in New York and everywhere else. They all have their credit card office there because you can get good talent, you can, swap employees. So I think when you're looking for the grad programs, the rankings start to really lose value as you're setting your goals up and you're looking at the programs. I mean, really pick the program that's best for you. And to your point, don't get really excited that you're going to have an Ivy League on the resume
Yeah.
because it in the research side, the quant dev side, often it doesn't matter. They're looking for people that already have the skill set to do that sort of job.
Right, right, right. No, that's a fair point, Dimitri, because I know for a fact that my friend she graduated from Columbia University, and the salary that people say students get from Columbia, she was nowhere close from that, and that's why I know, like, for a fact that you should not see just like the statistics and just go into the program. I guess a better way is to understand the curriculum, and as you said, like, I mean, like, NC State curriculum, that is very much aligned to risk management. I guess
Mhm.
70 to 80% of our alumni, or people who graduated within my batch, also even my juniors, they are all into risk management. And there are so many quant analyst jobs into risk management, so many of them. I feel they have done such a good thing. I mean, because end of day, every international student want to have a job, and
Yes.
that's what they are doing it. I mean, Ansys said, I feel one of the best decision I ever made to join that university. So yeah.
Yeah, so NC State, I don't know who figured it out there, but it was like a big secret that the banks were hiring because I joined in 2014. And it was like there were some quants at banks and they needed it because the new regulations from Dodd-Frank in 2010. And the weird thing was like I looked around and I'm like PhD, 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 and I'm like, okay, two masters in me. And I'm like, at least half of us all have PhDs. I'm like, this is really cool. Like I really want to do like math and stats. And I had a great time talking to everybody. And to your point, right? The like no one figured it out. And even today, I go to these programs and I talk. I'm like, you guys, you could place students at the big banks, and they're like, yeah, 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 we're doing commodities and we're doing the equity markets and we're doing well. And I'm like, no, there's these like you come to Dallas, like at Citibank, for example, and there's hundreds of employees and it's validation and model development. And I'm looking around like you're missing the opportunity.
Right.
I don't NC State. I'm like, we saw them. I saw them coming up like slowly on my radar, and I'm like. oh, they're offering, like risk management and credit risk. I was like, you realize every single firm, well, almost every firm has a credit division.
Right.
Like banks, hedge funds, like everyone's gonna have a credit division. So yeah, it is weird that the kind of a point on this that universities are still stuck on stochastic calculus. Like everybody must price derivatives. And it's just like, and then they all say, well, that was what, bankrupted the economy basically back in 2007, 2008. And I'm like, no, it was securitizations,
Right.
which mortgage-backed securities really aren't a derivative product. It's like an insurance product with a bet. I mean, I'm working in securitizations right now. They're not the same thing, but it's this weird thing that we've tied derivatives, I guess, to Fisher Black, like the original Quant and Emmanuel Derman and all that. And then all of a sudden we've brought in like this failure point and we've merged these together, but
Yeah.
they can't get out of their own way to teach better curriculum,
Hmm. So
which
like
is odd.
Yeah, Dimitri, like what do you think? Can any takes on university rankings or anything on university? Or I remember you before the podcast you mentioning that you have certain things to show. So I'm just excited if you can show like your statistics or anything you want to
Yeah, we
comment.
we can dive into this. Let me share my screen real quick. Let's see, I have my questions on here. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so to start off with here, like I think all of the, I'm not going to say most of the rankings and most of the universities have good intentions,
Mhm.
but I think ranking programs, so I started ranking programs in 2020, let's look on here,
Mhm.
2022. So I've
Okay.
done 3 years of rankings, getting ready to build out my questions for the fourth year now. Ranking programs is super, super hard.
Right.
And I'll get into this in a second with some of these on QuantNets. QuantNet's the biggest. So they always take the heat no matter what. I mean, Andy's taken a lot of heat here. I think they've done their best at trying to get to the numbers, but I want to point out why I think it is vastly misleading, and why it's hard to fix it. Like, I don't have like, my ranking's not like magical. But my rankings themselves, there is no ranking. You either make the list as an honorable mention or you don't make the list.
Mhm.
And part of my rankings is highlighting what is the program really good at.
Mhm.
So trying to get to students and saying, hey, if you want to do these things, this will be the opportunity to go to. But also, I think this other program is amazing. But don't go there because it's not going to be a good fit for you. Like, this is an awful program for you. And I think that's what these rankings are missing. And I'll get into that with this. But let's just go through kind of how they do their rankings here in 2025.
Right.
They've done a great job at being transparent on how the rankings are done, which I think is a huge mistake because the programs game the system. But the first thing is here in 2025, peer assessment. I had a conversation long ago with Peter Carr, who's no longer with us, but Peter Carr is talking about this too. Like, no program knows every other program. So
Mm.
me rating, it's like me saying, I'm going to rate you as a quant. Like, let me determine how good you are at your job. I've never worked with you, but let me give you a rating. It
Right.
just doesn't make any sense. And when you look at the rankings themselves, so let's pull up the rankings real quick. I mean, every program that is top rated will continually be top rated because of the peer assessment, and it's 20%, which is a lot. So, I mean, let's just rattle them off without even looking at the list, right? It's Princeton, Columbia, Baruch, NYU, 2 programs there, 2 programs at Columbia. You're going to be thinking about Carnegie Mellon. You're going to be thinking, I mean, we all know the top 5, 10 programs, and then there's everybody else. And a lot of this thing is just driven solely based off the peer assessments. And you can look through here too. I think they have, yeah, like peer assessments for Princeton's 3.7, Baruch's 4.2, Carnegie Mellon's 4.2. And then when you scroll down to the bottom, not surprising, let's just go like mid stack here. Boston's towards the end at 2.5, University of Minnesota's 2, University of California, San Diego, which I never knew how to program, is at 2. And then all these other ones are not rated or in the twos as well.
Yeah.
So it's very odd that you have essentially, and as you scroll up, you can see it kind of linearly goes up. UCLA is 3.1, UW's 2.5, Fordham's 2.4. And then you get into these upper programs, they tend to get much higher peer reviews. Peer reviews, I just don't think add any value.
Right.
It's like saying like, I don't know. It's just ridiculous. I won't hit this one too hard on the points.
Okay.
And then they break out the other portions into placement success and student selectivity.
Mhm.
Uh, so these are good. I mean, you can see what the goal is of the ranking here, which is going to be the goal of going to grad school is to get a job,
Right.
right? And I'll put that very broadly, right? A job could mean academia, it could mean the industry, right? The goal is to get some sort of job because you're obviously taking out a ton of money to pay for tuition, to live in the US. Even I took out a bunch of student loans. My wife and I took out like 160,000. I
Okay.
think interest rates were like 10 or 12% through government loans because I wasn't, I didn't have a big credit history or rich parents to help finance it at like a bank. I think Chase Bank was like 4 or 5%, but I was at like the federal rates. Whole other story. But yeah, job placement's great, but it makes 55% of their output. So really what they're saying is, hey, what other programs think about you? Um, can we place you in jobs, which I think is a good goal, but a little misguided here. And then the last one's going to be student selectivity, which is going to be undergrad GPA and acceptance rates. So let me just dive in on these two on why placement means nothing,
Mhm.
at least the way it's done. First off is going to be the fact that what does job placement mean? Like, where are you working? If I get a job at McDonald's, does that count as job placement?
Oh, okay, okay. I understand what you're,
You
and
get,
I have
yeah,
I have something to say. I'll tell you after this. Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So job placement, I think, is very misleading, especially when I start to talk to programs and they say, I'm so excited. All of our students are getting placed here. And they'll give me a company, and I'm like, that's not quant finance. And they go, no, no, I know, but they need those skills. And then you start to think, hold on, what skills are you offering them?
Right.
Because that might be a misalignment. Now imagine a student perspective or an industry perspective. So my rankings focus not on the students. My rankings focus on the industry, right? I'm a hiring manager. I want to make sure these programs are giving me good students. I don't
Right.
care about the student part of it. Um, but you start to realize like it might be an MBA dressed up as a quant finance degree. It might be a computer science degree in programming and software development dressed up like a quant finance degree. And they can't place students in quant finance. So as a student too, you're really disappointed, right? You took out I mean, I talked to a bunch of students, you talked to as well. They go through these programs, they spend all this money, they graduate, they're either unemployed or they're working in a different industry and they're pissed off. And I'm like, I get it. The program lied to you. And it
Mm,
wasn't knowingly. I don't think the programs are misleading you saying, oh, we're gonna like, gonna get this student, we're gonna make, 70 grand, 100 grand off them. But I think it's that disguise of job placement. You might have 100% job placement. You're not placing people in the industry. I see a lot of wealth management roles, like
mhm.
financial advisors, and I'm like, how much math and stats does that really require? Because you're not like a quantitative analyst at a wealth management fund. You're literally meeting with clients.
Right.
So that's, I think, one of the big issues here with just placement and placement numbers.
Mm. Also, I'll tell you something. Let me tell you something. So after, like, upon graduation, all the international students, so we are on F1 visa, which is like the student visa. We get like 3 months. In these 3 months, we need to get a job. Okay.
Mhm.
If we do not get a job, we'll be kicked out of the country.
Yes.
Now the thing is, there is a loop in this. There's a hole in this. The thing is,
Mhm.
what students do is, of course, no one wants to go back to India or back to their own countries because they have paid a lot of money upfront. So what they do is they start, after 90 days you can do a volunteering work, or if you get a volunteering certificate, that still counts as a job. So most of
Okay.
the that I know, who have graduated, it's been few months, they have not, like 4 5 months, they have not gotten the job, but they are doing the volunteering work so that they can still stay in the country. So the way they report to the school is, yes, we have gotten the jobs. Now that's why you see most of the universities, they say that, oh, within after 3 months, most of their students have placed. It's not placed. They have
Yeah.
just they have just taken up a volunteering work, and they are saying this to the university that, we are employed, so that they can stop their EAD days. We get
Yeah.
90 EAD days, 90 days, and if we don't get a job within those 90 days, we are kicked out. So a lot of students, they do this volunteering work just to stay in the country. It's not wrong, because of course I have paid so much money, to the country. I at least need to make at least what I've given, right?
Yeah.
At least I need to get some ROI on what I've spent. So this is that's why, if someone can give that breakup, okay, where are the students placed,
Mhm.
and what salary are they placed, that's what makes a good I mean, that's what I think, because I know so many international students who does this.
Mm.
And I mean, people think they have gotten placed, but in reality they are not.
Yeah, and it's a tough spot. I mean, there's the STEM designation as well, which I think helps extend the
Right.
time frame.
Right.
You're right. It's not a good system, and the biggest problem, which I've talked about with others, is how do you validate the data the programs even give you?
Yeah, no one does that, I don't
Right?
think.
No one can, no one will. Even the programs I've talked to a lot of programs, they complain on how much work and effort it is to do the rankings. And
Right.
I get it. Like you have to go and collect it all and you're trying to track students down. But the issue kind of like you're hitting at too is right is there's all these nuances to the data, which I
Right.
feel like as a quant we really care about and we get really excited to know like, job placement at 3 months and 6 months, that's great. And then you're like, oh, but you have to be placed by 3 months or
Yep.
6 months or 9 months, right? If not, you're leaving. So really the data itself is misleading and there's not even, I don't feel like a differentiation. And I wonder like, do the people doing the rankings, do the universities know that? Or
Mm.
are they just doing this to do this? And I feel like, not to rag on quants too much, I think this is like a really dumb quant approach of like, what numbers do we have to make a score? But we know the score doesn't work. It's like we need validators like in the banking industry. They're going to come in and fail you. Yeah, and a lot of these numbers are really sketchy like that. And I think kind of what we talked about I think previously too is like starting salaries and bonuses as well are a big sham.
Right.
Um, Everybody will dogpile on me and complain and say I know nothing. Oh, it's just your job. You're not really a quant, all this stuff. And even the programs I feel like do this, and it's weird because you get caught lying. Like your average salary is not 200. I know it's not 200 because I talked to your student who's making 85 or 110.
Yeah.
And and this is why I do my rankings a little differently. My rankings are very vague for a reason. And part of this is I don't want the programs to game the system. I want the programs just to be honest with me and just tell me what's good about your program. Right?
Mhm.
Tell me why you're a winning program and who are you made for? Like, let me build a case on why you're a great program. But I'm also going to view this through the perspective of I am a practitioner. I do talk to thousands of students. I do go to all these conferences. I talk to all these other industry practitioners that are hiring at, AQR and like Two Sigmas and a lot of these big hedge funds. So I have this unique perspective. I can really start to figure out what your program is really about and try to get around some of these issues. And salaries is one of those where one of the programs, I don't know if they accidentally told me or what, they were telling me that according to the Code of Ethics hand wavy MBA standards, for like reporting salary, everybody reports the top 75%. You don't have to report the bottom 25.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'm like, that's not how math works. Like when you tell me the average salary is something, I assume you have a sample, which is your graduating class, and this is the average. And so that's misleading, I think, in itself. And that unfortunately, that university was a business program. They then went on to tell me how awful all the math programs are and how all the math programs are lying and cheating. And I looked at their salaries and I knew their salaries were inflated. So they definitely were using the top 75%. They weren't necessarily lying, but I don't think it's very ethical the way they present them. And I
Right.
don't know if QuantNet knows that. I don't know if they specifically when they ask the questions, what is the placement rate? I mean, I've been really blessed when I've asked programs like, what is your placement rate? And they'll follow back and say, within how many months? Do you want us to include the no jobs or the jobs? Like they're starting to ask questions. I'm like, okay, they understand the game.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't think that comes out a lot on the rankings. There's not an asterisk, there's not explanations on that. So I
Mhm.
don't think anyone's necessarily like being bad per se, but everyone's wanting to get higher in the rankings. And if schools
Right.
can fudge the numbers, they do.
Yeah, what if, I always think, what if, because all this university, they basically tell, okay, we got $200,000 of salary. I don't, what if they are telling the wrong numbers? Who knows that? I don't know, like, who
Nope, no
knows
one.
the real thing? Yeah. If
No,
someone,
and it's hard too because the other problem is they might have a student making 200,000, but what they're not telling you is that student has worked in the industry for 10 years
yeah,
and as a trader, and then they went back to school for, a master's degree, which any top program is going to accept them. So they're going to have a huge name on their resume. And then after they have that huge name, then they're going to go out and get a job for 200 or 300 or 500,000. And so then you start to look at, okay, well, now this really skews the average because you got this one guy making, 250, 500,000. And then you've got all your other students that are, making 100, 120. And you're like, that's not really the truth, but we're going to throw it in there. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you exclude all the unemployed people.
Yeah. And on top of it, like if you just report like top 75%, then it's all gone. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a crazy, the math and the data is really crazy. Like it really is. Even if like we were given the data, and I think a lot of it's provided on QuantNet, so a big thank you to them for providing it. But there's a lot of details that the universities don't share. I know a lot of the universities in general are just disgruntled with how each university is behaving, but there's no way to validate it. And I think that's the hardest piece of doing the rankings, no matter who you are.
yeah, I feel content at least because when I was also coming to US, for last few years, I was checking rankings of universities on Continent, and that's how I got to know, right? I mean, which university is good or which university is moving up the ladder and which university is going down the ladder. But I feel it's a very, very tough job to rank program, validate the whole data set. No one knows if it's a true data, if it's a false data. It's a very, very tough game, I believe.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I hate doing it.
Yeah.
Which people probably don't realize. But now I feel like I've started it, like I have to keep going because the programs are invested. They've taken the time. I want to make sure that they're rightfully getting some marketing out of it. They're getting some highlights on programs that aren't seen.
Right.
And that leads me somewhat to my um, overall rankings, the way it's set up. I'll pull them up real quick. Wasn't
Okay.
planning on sharing, but I'll pull them up. These are
Okay.
some of the questions I'm working through and working on. If you just look at this, I do an independent interview of the two students that university can pick and choose, and I ask them basically what they like about the program, what they don't like about the program, and then I ask alumni, so people who've like they've been working for like 5+ years, because you're gonna have a very different perspective than somebody who just graduated and is rah 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 so excited to be a graduate of whatever university here. So that helps a little bit, I think, provide a more unbiased opinion. Obviously, universities will give you the best students and the best alumni possible,
Right.
but you take that into consideration. The other piece is all these other questions I asked, they're all the program structure. A lot of
Okay.
the rankings are taking into consideration what is the curriculum like? What classes are you teaching? The biggest question I ask and I spend the most time looking at is the list of courses that are the core courses. What are the electives that you guys offer? Which departments do they come out of? Something else I do is I look at the textbooks used for those core courses and the chapters they cover.
Oh, okay.
Because I will see one course covering an entire book, like 25 chapters. And
Mm.
as you know, you can't cover that in a semester at great depth. And then
Yep.
when you start to take a step back and you realize what is the program's focus, you start to get a better view of, okay, these are the textbooks they're using, these are the chapters they're covering. Their students aren't prepared for this, so they're not going to generate very good graduates. Or perhaps maybe they're only like Michigan, I keep hitting on just because I spend so much time looking at their program. But Michigan, they have such strict prerequisites that they really focus on that. So you're like, okay, they really are hitting the math at really great depths.
Right.
But then you start to look at other things, for example, like what are the career services like? Are they awful? For a long time, Michigan, for example, didn't have a career placement person. So it was all up to you as a student, or you go to like the general university and I interviewed at Burger King or something at Michigan. Like it was it wasn't like, these great finance companies coming in here. So a big portion of my review is going to be the program structure, which I think is the biggest piece of if it's a good program. And I don't think you can really judge that, as a student per se. It's hard to do because you don't have the experience of all the textbooks. And then the student body piece is very small, right? I'm looking at the scores, like the metrics. What is the average GRE score, if you require it or not? What degrees do your students hold? So trying to figure out what is the program's focus. How many students have work experience? I'm starting to hit the salary numbers. Like, why is your salary number so high? And it's like, oh, because they all have 3+ years experience. And then we start looking through like job titles of students. So I want to see where you're working, and I look these students up. Like I'm looking online. Like they don't give me the names, but I'm looking up, like whatever program it is, like say NC State, and I'm looking at, model developer. And I want to see the student. If I can't find anybody, something's not adding up in the data there. So it kind of helps me gauge that. And then the new section is, the program's progress. I want programs that are changing and getting better to be highlighted, right? Because I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but some programs have a new director every 2 to 5 years.
Yep. Yep.
And, and so it's really hard to say, is that a good program?
Right.
It's like, I don't know, what classes are they teaching and what has the director done? And like Michigan, for example, this last year added a career services person. So I
Hmm.
was really excited, like, they finally, they're going to make this program better here. And it makes me good on that. But I use all this to criticize the programs. I don't know if you've seen my reviews of the programs, but I highlight like this is who the program's for. This is what's great about the program. And then I hit on this is what the program's not good at doing. This is what they need to improve on. So students can hopefully gauge that perspective. And
Hmm.
one of the things which somebody gave me in a few discussions I had a few people mention it, they've made the case that we shouldn't be ranking the programs, that we should just be providing it like QuantNet here with all like peer review scores, all the data, but no weights, and then allow the students to apply their own weights to get to a score, which I
Right.
think is a naive approach, because when you're a student, you don't know.
Yeah. You don't know anything. Yeah, that's right.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what I really care about. It's like you mentioned, I want a job at the end of the day.
Right.
I just want a really good job. Like that's what I want out of the whole thing. So maybe that should be 100% for the student. But as you know, as you go through a career, you start to think about longer term perspectives as you get like 5 years in. You start thinking about like, do I want to be in this role long term? And am I going to get promotions? Or, I got that first job and I hate the job. I'm not doing the skills I want to do. And you start thinking, how do I transition? How do I switch? So as a student perspective, right, it's hard to know like what area in quant finance to go into. Even when you're in the first year or two, you're still trying to figure out how do I get to what I thought I wanted? And is the industry that was sold to me online through videos, is that even real? Or am I even in the right marketplace? So I don't think students are in a position to really like set the weights. So I think a better way to do it is like, I guess the way I'm doing it, which is how do you weed out and say these are top-notch programs. They will provide you good value regardless of what you do. But also this is who the program is for. So if you're in this scenario, these are the programs I'd look at and save students a lot of headache.
Right.
Because I mean, I had no idea when I was in grad school. I was like, I want to go to Columbia. I want to go to NYU. I want to go to Carnegie Mellon. Like these are the best programs. And I look back and I'm actually really glad I didn't go there
Hmm.
because it would have put me in a very different position in a different job. And most of those would not have put me in the banks. And it's very odd for students to hear this. They're all like so excited about the trading side. But I love being in the banks where it's slow, it's methodical. I'm doing like actual, I mean, I don't know if you can see in this one. I have like textbooks sitting on my desk back here when I work. And it's like I have time to sit and read and like to solve a really hard problem. Where when you work on like the market side, which I wanted to be a trader, which wasn't a quant, right? And I wanted really fast-paced life. And now I look back and I'm, 30, almost 36 now. I'm like, I don't want that crazy lifestyle. I want a house and a family and I want to settle down and I don't want the chaos of New York City. It was awesome when I was in my 20s. But, now that I'm getting old, I feel like I'm an old man here, even though I'm still pretty young, right? Your perspective shifts. And I think a lot of this is hard to digest and put into rankings and to explain.
Right.
Uh, but these are things I think that should be considered of like, let's focus on building really good quants that are academically prepared for the industry as a whole.
Mhm.
And then we can weed out the programs that are, placing tech students or placing, data engineers or, consultants doing accounting consulting. I had a friend going to PwC doing accounting, like not quant.
Right. I
So
understand.
yeah. So I think that's a lot of the issues with the rankings here. I thought we'd pull up some of the programs just to kind of look at them. Um, I don't like, so one of the things I thought was odd as I was just scrolling through my first take here, like these are the programs I expect here. And of course, all the numbers on the top couple are high, like graduation employment's 95, at 3 months, 100%, yada, yada, yada. And for those interested, the little lock just means you have to have an account and sign in. I'm just not signed in here. But if I sign in, you can see the average comp and some of the locked things. Um, but if you scroll down, this is what bugged me. the percentage of are employed in the US. So to your point before, right? You come to the US to get a job here.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to say, "Hey, I went to the US, paid the cost of living in the US, plus paid the ridiculous tuition in the US, and guess what? I'm going to go home."
Makes sense. I mean, if you just see MIT, I mean, they are charging, I guess, $125,000 and 66%, which means, yeah, I mean,
Not good.
two-third of their people are in US, one-third is almost gone. So I feel,
Yeah. And yeah, so I was looking like MIT stood out as very odd. And then I scrolled, Columbia was at 56.
yeah,
I'm like,
Columns, I don't know, for some reason, yeah, I didn't, I mean, yeah, that's okay. I'll
yeah,
not.
so we don't have to weigh in on each program, but the trend seemed odd. Like it was like 80s and 90s up here, and then all of a sudden it tanks. So I'm like, okay, this is just how the ranking is set up. But then what bugged me is University of Chicago is back at 79%.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at graduation, they have 78% placement, 95% at 3 months. This seems like a really good program. And then when you look above, just right at Columbia, it's 37 and then 100%, which is not much different than 95, and then 76. So the sign-on bonus and the salaries, I'm guessing, are higher, but also the cost of living in New York is higher.
Right.
Should they adjust for these sort of things? Like this is what like runs through my head. And so as I'm scrolling down here again, it's like, Georgia Tech's a higher, which I won't comment too much on them. This Columbia one again is lower, but this like starts to trigger something like what's going on here with the data? What's going on with the programs? What's going on with the rankings? I know the math finance program at Columbia is actually really good.
Mhm.
So if I was to rank them from an academic standpoint on the educational material you would learn, I know this is a strong program, but they're coming in like at ninth, tied with, again, Cornell and NYU, which are other top-notch programs. And a shout out to NC State there, your school coming in here at 12th.
Yeah, I
But you
get.
look at, and to your point, right? 100% placement in the US. I feel like this program should then be moved up and
Right.
then, cost of tuition as we start to get into tuition. But then it starts to get into the nuanced details of like, how do we get through the other information that we have? Like, are they actually placing them in quant jobs? Because now when you start to scroll through some of these programs, I can tell you for a fact there are some of these programs in the top 10 that are not placing very many quants. And I know because our students are reaching out to me saying, I really need a job. Please come hire us. We're looking for work. Uh, but yeah, the rankings just seem off to me. Even though when you go through this ranking, it's like, okay, we already know that peer assessment's garbage and that's going to bias the programs. But I think this is just flawed. And I think that's what we're seeing when we go through a lot of these is that there just seems to be like this weird, like the data looks okay in some of these. I still question it. But it seems something's like not quite right with the rankings.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so this is I think something to think about, right? As a student, is job placement where you were going, as we kind of mentioned. The other tabs I think I love about QuantNet. So big shout out and thank you to them. The data they actually collect is 10 times more than I collect. So it's a big burden on the programs, which I understand from the program perspective is awful and painful. But these charts, I do think add some value and some insight. Um, but I think trying to think about this like a quant, what are the loopholes and what are the way to game the system? Because every university wants to get top rated. Because if you are top rated, regardless of how good or bad you are, you're going to get more applicants next year. And when you get more applicants next year, it makes you a top rated program because you can look on here on the admissions. Here's like Fordham's. You can see it start off in 2017 with 715 apps and it's going down. And then
Right.
all of a sudden we're turning back up. We're coming up. Uh, but they also look at acceptance rates. Well, acceptance rate means nothing because you could make your cohort size bigger or you
Right.
could make it smaller. Or the number of applications you might have a big influx one year versus another year. So you have, I'll look at some of these more popular ones here in a second. So Fordham's getting 715. They're on my ranking. They've done some amazing things in the last few years, changing the program, really focusing on the curriculum side of this. And then you look at programs, let's look at like Columbia, right? And they're looking at let's see, 1,473 apps. Like it's brand name. It's brand name recognition. It's nothing against them, but then when you start to look at like the acceptance rate, of course their acceptance rate's going to be low. It
Right.
has to be low. Like, so I think when you look at these, the data is really interesting in a lot of these programs here. And we can go to like, here's NC State's. Again, they're getting some pretty good apps, 260s. Um, the trends are interesting to analyze too.
Right.
Like NC State is very odd. Like they had 60% acceptance rate in 1 year. But again, the lowest number of applications. So it makes sense. Like something happened, there wasn't a lot of apps, maybe the program was repositioning. Maybe a program spent less on marketing, which I don't think a lot of students realize. Some of these programs are literally flying to India and going to universities and meeting students in person.
Hmm.
Rutgers does it. Big shout out to Rutgers because it's genius. Like, and I know some of the other programs I won't list here, they're traveling the US, going to these universities, trying to get applications, right? So you're going to boost your numbers based on your marketing. So it's hard to really say. I feel like that, like, oh, it's a really picky program because the acceptance rate is really low, because schools can really screw with that, and just making the cohort size much smaller is an easier way to do that.
Right.
Um, I mean, here's Georgia Tech's. A lot of programs, if you haven't noticed, in 23, 24 had a real big drop.
Right.
I think a lot of the quant market's starting to dry up a little bit. So interesting insights for them. And of course, as their apps are going down, their acceptance rates are going up, as we would expect within the data. But NYU Tandon blows my mind. If anyone doesn't know, I believe it's the largest program. It might be the second largest. I don't know if they're doing larger. But again, brand name recognition, 1,600 apps, 459 offers, which is huge.
Yeah.
And then cohort size. Oh man, I'm not gonna add all these
Go
up,
to
but
146.
yeah, yeah, on that one. Yeah, it's huge, huge. I mean, huge. I mean, I don't know how big was NC State? I mean, 146 just seems like
My batch had like 40, 45. Yeah, not more.
okay.
I
Yeah, Michigan had
graduated.
52 when I was there.
Yeah, I graduated in 2022. So if you see, yeah, it was close. So that's the best thing about NC State. They make sure their cohort is small and they can give attention to everyone. And that's why you see the placement is 100%. Why? That's the thing. Cohort is small, they give attention, they make sure everyone gets the job. So that's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a hard thing to balance. So when I had the interview with Peter Carr, who was the director of NYU Tandon's program, their program again, it's trying to get. This is why I try to do these reviews and these questions, is trying to get more information so I can share it with the students. And NYU Tandon's very interesting because Peter Carr went into the industry and found people that were towards the end of their careers that kind of wanted to retire, but really enjoyed teaching. And he went and pulled all these people in who were not academics,
Right.
right? Most schools are like saying, oh, you have to have a PhD to teach, you have to be an academic. It'd be great if you had industry experience. These people don't exist. There's hardly any of them. And he went out and found kind of the opposite, which is how do you get a bunch of people with industry experience and bring them all in? So they've created this massive staff or faculty members. But when you go to other programs, which I won't pull the other ones up, they have huge cohort sizes and they don't have very many electives or very many core courses. And so to your point, right, it makes sense when you start to see these really large sizes, they're money making machines for universities. You're charging 70 to 100,000. It's like an MBA. You're making a lot of fees. Um, and unfortunately, like you're not going to get the most hands-on quality attention because they're too busy. I mean, there's just not enough time to around with every student when there's a limited staff on that. Other things that are just kind of interesting on here as well, for those interested in QuantNet, which I think is pretty great. If you go through the jobs, you can pull up the salaries. You can hit the jobs tab. Let's see.
Right.
I'm going to pull these up real quick. I think you can obviously see when you start looking at all these salaries going up. It makes sense, right? I mean, we've had inflation. The industry's gotten a little bit more competitive, I think. Um, there's less jobs, I think, too, though. So it's kind of this weird dynamic. But to your point, we're starting to see like pretty high salaries from some programs. These ones all seem fairly reasonable. These are year over year salaries. I don't have them unlocked on here, but the ones doing like 180s, 200s, like it's not there.
Yeah, I don't trust either. Yeah, no one is making, and that's like the average salary. It's not like the maximum
Best.
salary. Yeah, it's the average salary, which yeah, I really doubt. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think you have an interesting perspective on that too, because we talk to so many students.
yeah,
It's like, you're working with a student and they're struggling and they can't get a job, and then they land the job. And for anyone listening, like, I work with the top schools. And I
yeah.
know we've talked in the past, top schools, you're talking top 10 on QuantNet if you want to use these rankings, and they are having a hard time finding work. They can't find jobs. I know a guy that graduated in May who still can't find a job, and it's deemed one of the best programs in the country. So, and again, the salaries are coming in much lower when we start to talk to these individuals. So yeah, and I feel like when you challenge that too, that people say like, well, you're not really, that's not a real quant, or it's not a real program. And you're just like, all right, I just give up. But yeah, so I think for anyone listening, if you're a student, keep that in mind. I still give the ranges of non-New York is typically like 80 to 100 to 110, maybe 120. And then people that are going to be New York City, you might be getting like between 100 and like 135, 140s, which when you go through this data and you go at 124, this is a New York school, 152, it seems a bit high to be quite honest. 122 seems about right. 120. This one I'm kind of skeptical over, but that's another story. And like 120 off of NYU, again, New York City salaries. Like, I mean, and I don't know your take on it, but living outside of New York is amazing because if you get even like $100,000 non-New York versus 120 in New York, it's
It's
like
great.
you're making 200,000 and in in Dallas or Denver, and you're making like 120 in New York. It's just a really big cost of living difference.
A huge difference, I would say. I remember back in Regions when I was working for Regions Bank. I used to stay in Birmingham, Alabama. I had a big 1B, one BHK apartment, 1B, and I was
Yeah.
paying $800. So it was close to 700 square feet, and it was amazing. Yeah. So I was like, that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, my first job I made 80.
Okay.
And like my goal was to make 70 to start. Like I just 70 would be like a really good salary. I mean, I come from middle class America. I'm not like some Northeasterner, like parents making lots of money. And I got this offer for 80 and I was so excited to make it. And I realized living in Dallas my first year, I think I had like a 1,200 square foot apartment, 1,400 square foot apartment, one bedroom with a massive living room, this like office area and everything. I felt like I was living on top of the world. Like I realized 70,000 and above, at least back in 2014, you could do anything. I could pay all my student loans. I could go out to eat whenever I wanted. I could have really nice trips. I could do all kinds of stuff with this money. And the craziest part is you hear on these quant forums, like people are like mad, like you're not making, 250, 300, like as if like if you're not making that starting, like you're not. And it blows my, I'm like, maybe New York. I guess maybe if you're living in New York. I mean, I had a buddy that was renting a room for 1,200 a month with like three roommates. And when I was in New Jersey, I would think I was paying like 4 grand.
Oh,
So yeah, but I mean, I was also renting two parking spots for my cars.
oh, yeah, then it makes sense. Yeah.
The insanity. But I think my rent still was like, I think 36 to $3,800 a month, which is
Mm.
insane. Like, it's just, but that was a whole different time. That was when interest rates were low, rent like a really stellar apartment. Like my first apartment, I think it was like 1,200 a month in Dallas. And again, it was good neighborhood, newer apartment, great amenities. But anyways, yeah. So those things are crazy. Some of those cost living aspects here. I think those are things that are interesting for students to take into consideration as well. I think it is much easier to find a job in New York City and Chicago, though. And often it's a good place to get the job start, right? Don't worry, the money will come, and you can transition and shift and kind of move around. One thing I tell people in general is careers are never steady. Doesn't matter where you work, you're going to bounce around. You're going to move somewhere else. Something's going to happen. Especially students that have like an awful boss or something. It's like, trust me, things will shift in a year or two. I know it's going to be unbearable, but just wait the year or two. Something will happen. They'll fire them. They'll bring someone else in. Something will happen. I don't know. Crazy things happen. But yeah, so I think the rankings are interesting. The reason I started doing my rankings is solely because QuantNet and RiskNet, I don't feel like do justice of like the reason you go, which is to get the education, to get a job, to do the skills that you learned. I would be very disappointed. I know many students are when you go and you learn something really interesting and really cool, and then you graduate, even if you're making a lot of money to do something that's just not that interesting. Especially for quants. I mean, I try to explain this to management all the time. Quants want to learn. I know this is very odd for like the non-quant roles. Like we want a hard problem and we want to learn and we want to read. And they look at me and they're like, that you think that's going to retain talent? Like this makes no sense. And I'm like, trust me, we could pay slightly less and have really interesting work and really, hard problems to solve. And people will be very excited to come because you're growing, you're learning. And I think that's kind of what the focus should be on the rankings. And I don't think you can do it numerically. I mean, I think kind of we're seeing through the data, it's so hard to do that.
Mhm.
The other piece too, just to cover, is also like GPA means absolutely nothing
I
because how do you compare it? I mean, so India's on a scale of 0 to 100, right?
so 0 to 10.
Okay, 0 to 10. I've heard other countries are 0 to 100. I've heard some countries are alphabetical.
Mm.
I don't know what that, how they,
So,
if it's just like A, B, C, D, F, or if it's like they have, I don't know. The US even is not consistent. We're on a four, I was always on 4 point. And then some students are like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm at a 4.3. And I'm like, it's not possible. I'm like, okay, some schools allow an A plus, so you get the point 0.3. Um, and then trying to compare even in the same university. So forget the fact that this is like a global industry, right? I mean, you saw these numbers as we're going through like the applications or the admissions. I mean, you see how many internationals there are in all these programs. It's huge. So you're comparing all these countries, which is a whole problem in itself. But let's pretend everybody's from the US, even looking at just the universities here, how do you compare universities here? That's a problem. And then going even more narrow, how do you compare degrees? Because I
right.
can tell you a 4.0 in a business program and a 4.0 in an engineering or a math program are two very, very different things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, and even like if you think about engineering versus like applied math, right? They both take calculus, they both take math classes. Often they're taking different courses. So how do you judge like how good their math and stat skills are when you're at the same university, the same GPA, but completely different, course structures and designs and programs? So I think it's a good attempt, but that's one of those things where it's so hard to differentiate.
Right.
And like even for internationals, like I when I hire someone from India or from China or somewhere, the first thing I do is I find an Indian or a Chinese colleague and I message them like, get over here and look at this because I don't know what the school is. I mean, if it's not Peking from China or some of the other big name schools. I think India's what IIT.
Yeah, IIT is the biggest, yeah.
So,
Before,
so I know the big ones, right? It's kind of like the U.S. Like Harvard and MIT and Yale and everything. But when you start to get to smaller schools, I mean, how do you differentiate those? It's just such a challenging thing to do. Even if you like took experts in from, that country, it's still just a really hard thing to compare like GPA and all that sort of thing. So,
right. Mhm. So just Dimitri, like I have few questions. Like, what do you think are some good programs students should apply? I know like you do certain rankings and you do rank certain programs. So if you can share like your perspective.
yeah, I'll pull up my rankings real quick. If you go to fancyquantnation.com, these are my 2024s.
Okay.
And I'll talk a little bit about these. I have non-participating programs.
Okay.
So I'll tell you one of the hardest things on ranking programs is getting trust of programs to provide you data,
Right.
which to me like blew my mind. Like I'm a YouTuber, I'm huge, it's free marketing. I charge you nothing. You just have to take the time to fill it out. But I get programs they don't want to be blindsided with like, Dimitri thinks we're great, but he also said these 10 things suck and, these students shouldn't apply there because I'm pretty honest. Like my YouTube channel is pretty like just brutally honest.
Yeah,
Uh
I guess you have amazing audience, amazing, and that too like very specific quant audience. Yeah. So it's yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so like and these are in no specific order here, but I love Fordham because I think they're the underdog program that's really turning things around. They're really spending a lot of time like programming, but also doing stats with it. Like their students, I had dinner with their students, so I went out with
Okay.
them. And that's one of the things I think that a lot of people don't realize is because of my position, because I get to present at a lot of these universities, I start to build relationships with the programs, but also with a lot of the professors. And the professors, let me tell you, behind closed doors at dinners, they will tell you anything about the program, which the programs probably don't like to know. But you start to get a really good feel of the program. But Fordham's, their students, for example, are like, but why are we taking econometrics? Like, who's ever used like a Garch model? And then I'm like, at dinner, I'm like, "Oh, volatility modeling uses a Garch model." I'm getting like excited to explain it. Fordham's done that really good job though. They're starting to make a lot of the core stats courses requirements, and they're making their students program at low level languages like C++, and they're bringing in Python and making sure the students are really hands on. And they've added in uh, class projects with industry like companies, which I would love to have had like an actual hands-on, project as a student. So Fordham's doing good at that. I think they get overranked, even though they're in New York City.
Right.
They've done really good, I think, at coming back and building out the curriculum. So I think it's the strong curriculum. But again, it's going to be focused on the stats and the programming side.
Right.
Uh, Carnegie Mellon is probably the best overall. And
Okay.
I say that because if you look at their reports, they place students everywhere.
Mm.
So if you want to end up in those wealth management roles or you want to end up in consulting or something that's kind of adjacent, they're also placing students in those roles. Their program's older, it is larger. They have that flexibility to really do that. So I think Carnegie Mellon's a good place to consider, but very competitive. University of Michigan, I think, is great if you want to do derivative pricing.
Okay.
So
Because do they have a lot of mathematics course or stochastic calculus?
yeah. So hold on. So one of the best things about doing the rankings is I go out and I buy the textbooks. So not
Oh,
all of them, right? Because as I review programs, it gets expensive. But like this book is Monte Carlo Methods in Financial Engineering by Paul Glasserman. It is like much more rigorous than doing like nonsense. I have Whole, I think on this desk over here, I was looking something up. Like Whole. Like Whole is great. It's this like fluffy, hand wavy, like this is a derivative and this is some pricing and you know, but Michigan's focus is they do financial engineering, but it kills their job placement rate. Because I mean, when you like because you're working on derivatives right now, aren't you?
so I'm not working on derivatives.
What are you working on right now for work?
Mostly fixed income modeling.
Okay. So as you can relate to this too, there's not a ton of people in the derivatives area, right? You don't have a team of like 30 people doing it. At a bank, right? You have like credit, there's huge teams
Right.
because there's trillions of dollars going through mortgages. There's billions of dollars in auto loans. There's huge amount so there's a lot of jobs in these other spaces. Like we talked about, NC State found this loop, like this pocket where they need quants. Michigan's program has been so focused on like true financial engineering derivative products that the students they bring in are typically really math heavy and they graduate really understanding the math well. But
Mm-hmm.
the point they miss on the program, I think, is the statistics is a bit light. And most modeling that's outside of the derivative space is going to be statistics, right? Logistic regression, decision trees, and they're doing a good job. They're bringing in, they have a certificate you can do during the master's for machine learning, and it teams up with the actual, I think, like data science machine learning master's program, and you can kind of like build a better program out of it. But Michigan's program, I think, provides really strong math. For anyone that knows, the original program, which is not this program at Michigan, was between the business school and the math department. And as a business student, I was killed on these stochastic calculus courses.
Okay.
And I believe there were two specific ones. The first course covered all of Stephen Shreve's book one and two in one class in a semester. And they try
Oh,
to cover like large portions of the second book. And I was just shaking. And then I talked to people like at Carnegie Mellon who are taking like they're in trimesters, so they're shorter, but it was like the one book was the one trimester, and then the second book was another one. And I'm like,
that,
Michigan just tried to overdo it.
that's how I guess that's how it should be, different semesters. I mean, and if
Yes.
you, if you just fill in everything in one semester, I mean, there'll be no output from the student side because students also need time to grasp the concept, understand the concept. So many people coming from commerce background, they don't know. So I remember, like our teacher, one of the instructor was saying, okay, this is how it's this formula has been derived using Taylor series. Most of the commerce people do not know what is Taylor series. you know,
Yeah.
so stuff like that, people, I guess students really need time to understand things. So yeah.
Yeah. So Michigan's program is still in many ways like on steroids like that. But I think the reality is if you are like in a applied math or a pure math undergrad, it won't be that hard for you. It'll be more of a rigorous master's degree. But I think when you do graduate, you will be very prepared to do like actual derivative pricing. But that also hurts their job placement rate just because like they're so specialized. It's very hard to say, hey, go work at a bank or a hedge fund doing frilly equities or something else on that. Stony Brook's program again, I think is very underrated. I have no idea why.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought like, Stony Brook, we have all
That's
heard of Renaissance, right? I mean, who doesn't know that? And I don't know, right? I mean, I'm not sure if the batch size is small or what's going on because I have not seen many people. I don't know, for some reason I have not interacted with a lot of students graduating from Stony Brook as compared to other schools. So do you have any like what's your
yeah. I'll share some insight with them. Um, Stony Brook is one of the many programs, which probably people don't realize, that are not on QuantNet.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they don't want to be ranked. They don't want to participate, which I agree with them because I feel like they have been underranked when they did participate. Um, but they have smaller class size for the masters. But Stony Brook has a PhD program,
right.
which is one of the only in the ones in the country. I know like Columbia occasionally used to take on like one student every like 5 years or something, but Stony Brook has a dedicated PhD program working with top professors. Um, but the cohort sizes are small, so you don't see them often on like banks, for example.
Right.
They're very specialized. Again, the focus is really around the math and the stats. So they're all going to go into, I think most of them at least will go into like true research or model development jobs. You're not going to see a lot of them on like the trading floor or at the consulting company. Um, but their program's very rigorous, and I think because of the rigor in the program and because it's like a program ran by quants, like Robert Frey, I think is technically the director. Stan who is one of the inventors of the conditional value at risk. Again, like it blows my mind. Like, these are groundbreaking things that we all learn,
Right.
and they're running these programs. They're teaching the students, and I've interacted with some of the students and interviewed them, and they're all pretty bright as well. Like they seem to be brighter than the average program. Um, but I think because they're not on the rankings, they don't want to play the games and have to pull all the data and go through that process. We just don't see them as much.
Yeah.
But from a curriculum standpoint, they are very strong. They also have an awesome, I think it's called Spears program. Any university in New York can set it up, but essentially companies that are smaller in New York State can pay a student and they will work 20 hours per week for you for the entire year.
Oh, okay.
So I hate doing internships because like
Yeah.
you work at a bank, you probably get this, but firms in general have a hard time getting you assigned a laptop and then getting you access to things and then getting the project set up. And then by the time you're doing the project, you have 4 weeks and you're going back to school.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, the very first one goes just by this, taking all the permissions. And then, when you actually start working on the project, most of the students don't know what's the project about because, of course, they do not know the backstory of it.
Yeah.
So challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Stony Brook's like kind of solved this in a way. I've like been playing with the idea internally at Agora, like how do I do this? Because I want to set up a class project and get a student in and see how good they are, and then convert this into like a paid position and have them work, and we could get PhDs. Like, I think it's a really strong program, and I think they have a really unique way of doing job placement. So I like Stony Brook in that sense. I think it'd be a cool program to go like visit. And to your point, like I mean, Robert Frey was a managing director at Renaissance Technology. He was the one that founded this program and pushed it. I believe Jim Simmons was a supporter of it. I don't think he was ever actually involved. At least I don't know in that. So it's kind of an interesting perspective on that, but really interesting program. And then there's the non-participant programs, which are the programs I look at just from the website, like every other student, right? I have no insight. I'm not asking them questions. I had, of course, Baruch. I think Baruch's great for quant dev. I would not hire them for building models. The students I've interacted with seem like really gung-ho that C++ rules the world and that math is like the secondary skill set that doesn't really matter because they can just simulate everything. So if you're going to hire them for a quant dev, I think to be great, but I don't really know. I haven't had any personal contacts with them and reached out to them, so I can't say. Columbia's financial engineering program over the years has been top notch. The staff they've had, the teachers they've had, uh, it's just been a really good program. And from a curriculum standpoint, it seems like they tend to have a good balance of math and stats in the program and a lot less really finance classes. So I think I've liked that. Oddly enough, internationally, everyone wants me to rank international programs. I have reached out to programs in Singapore, across Europe through like Switzerland, I believe like Sweden, UK, France, and Germany. A lot of your, so there's been a handful of programs from all over the world have been invited. They do not want to participate. So they will not work with me. They will not provide me data. It drives me insane. But Imperial College, London, I think they have the strongest curriculum. There's another program which is consistently ranked higher in Europe. It is essentially an MBA. So I would say it's not a quant program, but it's getting good placement because job placement's great and salaries are great. I have North Carolina State. So NC State, I worked with a buddy of mine who went to NC State. I've looked at the curriculum again. It's just hitting on the core skills. And I think people go like, "Oh, that's so boring. Like it's just statistics." I'm like, "But this is what I need. I need someone to do all these sorts of skills." I think NC State has been getting better too. Like I've talked to you graduated there from a while ago. Is I'm talking to more students. Like more students are really excited about the industry that are coming out of NC State, and the curriculum just looks pretty good. So I've ranked them. TU Delft, I don't know how you pronounce it, out of Europe. Again, they have a really good curriculum, and I think they have really it's applied math masters, but they have a financial engineering focus you can do. Their program, if I remember correctly, is really focused on the stochastic calculus and on like derivative pricing as well. So they're kind of like the Michigan of Europe. That's a way to put them.
Yeah.
And then I had Rutgers. This probably blows most people's minds. They're MS in math. They're no longer a program.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
Yeah, they are not doing a program in 2025. From what I have heard, I don't have any definitive data, but it sounds like they had great curriculum from what I've reviewed, but their career placement was awful. And
Hmm.
Rutgers has two programs. They have one in the business school in Newark, which is still going strong. They're, I think, putting some better emphasis on the curriculum now as well. So they might be getting ranked here in the next year or two on my rankings. But the MS in math program, it was like when I had reached out to them too, so some personal insight, they didn't want to be ranked. And
Hmm.
like I'm trying to work with like I can bring you applicants. And I think what people are saying is they no one was applying there.
Oh,
Because why would you go to New Brunswick? You could go to the, Newark campus right next to New York City. And it's
right.
in the business school and it has much better job placement. And
I
so, yeah.
I guess I spoke to the senior program coordinator of Rutgers. His name is Zachary. I'm not sure if you know Zachary or not, but yeah, I had a podcast with him, so he shared like great insights about what do they look in the candidate, and they were like, I just we gave a lot of emphasis on what the transcript is, and specifically on what math courses, programming courses, and statistics courses students have taken. I think that's like a good take. I feel like someone who has done mathematics will be a good some like he will be able to transition into quant finance with ease. So I guess quant finance program of Rutgers is really strong.
Yeah. Yeah, they're doing great. Zach's taking over for Thomas.
Yeah, yeah,
If you know Thomas.
yeah,
They do amazing work, I think, with working with programs, like companies. Like they're the ones that are going to India recruiting people from IIT. Like they're going there like this is a great school in India. We want you to come here. And I'm like, this is the attitude we should have in the quant industry. Like, let's find the best and the brightest people. Let's bring them to the US. Let's educate them and get them really good jobs. And then we can make a really good industry.
yep, yep. I That's right.
Yeah. And at NYU Tandon, I just like some of the courses they have. I think their curriculum's a little bit unique. They have so many specializations and tracks. I've had David Shimko on my channel a few times. David's doing valuations courses from a quant perspective. So he teaches it mathematically to the point that like an MBA wouldn't be able to do it. But as a quant, it's like finance, but it's not dumbed down to things we don't use. And like he was talking about, like, the captain's wrong and we need to make adjustments to it. And you have to make adjustments to it. And like he teaches the course like this. And I've talked to you a little bit about his curriculum and his course, and I think he's done a great job. There's a few other professors at NYU as well that I've talked to, and it seems like they've brought in some really interesting industry practitioners, which would give you a different perspective. Um, I don't like their specialization in some nonsensical things like the crypto world. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a big draw for some students. But I think since they have such a large class size, they brought enough industry practitioners, that's been a big draw for them. The other piece, which is not on here, and I will never reveal, I have a blacklist of programs I will not rank.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have committed sins that are so bad I will not rank them unless they can somehow fix that. Some of those sins is one of the programs I found out from students. So it's great being on YouTube. Students will tell me anything. The students were some of the students, a couple of them, they were allowing transfer credits from their home countries to check off boxes for their master's programs, and it was core courses.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so one student was saying that goes, okay, what elective should I take? And stuff. I'm going to this program. Um, I only need to take, I think it was like 3 classes, and I'm going to graduate. I'll have the master's degree like everybody else. I'm going to fly into the US. I'm going to live there for like a 3 month period or 6 month, 3 months, 6 months, like 4 month period. Take the one semester and take my electives, and I'm going to get the degree.
Oh, I
And I'm
see.
like,
Really?
yeah, from an employer standpoint, I'd be mad. Like I hired a graduate from this program wanting the curriculum that you were being taught. If the university's taking transfer credits from other countries, like I don't know, again, I don't live in these countries, so I don't know how good the programs are. And even when you take courses at different universities, right? I know like Michigan has a really strong stochastic calculus course because you take 2 or 3 stochastic calculus classes, where other universities you don't take that many. But then to say like there's a university that we hope is doing the right thing and you took it as an undergrad, it just like it rubbed me the wrong way. And I've realized like from looking at how the program is being ran as well, there are other red flags like they have tried to maximize cohort sizes, which makes sense because they're making a ton of money. Most of the students aren't being placed into quant jobs, which I know because I track them and follow them and I see where they go. If anyone knows that's a subscriber of mine, I always tell you, like, tell me what you're doing. Like, follow up with me every year or two. A lot of this is data collection as well. One, I care about what you're doing and, who you are as a person, but it's nice to see, like, how you progress your career. But it also helps with rankings because I can see, like, your students are going into non-quant jobs and they stay there for 5, 6 years. So it's not a quant program. And there are other programs that I've just there have been rumors of things, and so I try to keep that as, it's a rumor. I'm not going to include that into any like sort of, ranking or anything like that. But it's really hard because the amount of time it takes to rank programs, which is why it's invite only. Because I'd also hate to say, hey, let's invite 40 programs, and then
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, you all suck.
That's right. That's right. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other piece too is for programs that are listening to this as well as students, programs that I invite that are not good enough to make the list are not released anywhere.
Mm.
So you could give me all your data. We could review the program. I'm happy to provide feedback. I do provide feedback to programs just in general that aren't ranked or anything. But I just don't rank you. So there's really no downside for a program. Like I want it to be like a marketing highlight of like, this program is great. Tell these students and these companies why you're a great program kind of approach instead of trying to do that numerical ranking or not ranking programs or, worse off like bad mouthing programs and being like, oh, this program's like, worst program out there. And I think part of that too for students to think about is sometimes the worst program out there is the only offer you're going to get,
Mm.
which is also, I think, hard to recommend programs to students because, like, say there's like 4 programs and you apply to all of them, or maybe it's 6 programs, but you apply to all these programs and you only get accepted into one, and everybody says it's an awful program.
Right.
Right? The question you have to ask yourself as a student, which is the hard question to answer, is do you spend the money? Because as we talked about, it's expensive. Do you spend the money to go to a bad program, meaning just a not as good as other program, and try to get a job out of it? Or do you just decide you're not going to pursue quantitative finance?
Hmm.
And I think it's a hard question to answer, but I think for a lot of students, if you're a top-notch student, you have the determination to get the job and the perseverance, you can go to an awful program and you can network and go to conferences and do some different sorts of projects to kind of help build up the weaker points of the program. And you can fill those in. So it's like I also don't want to discourage students from saying like, hey, like, these are the top 5 or 10, but don't go to the other programs because it really does discourage people that might be great candidates.
Right.
But I mean, there's thousands of applications, programs only have so many seats. Um, I mean, there are plenty of programs I think that are really good out there. I mean, like on the bottom of this list when we were non-participants, um, these ones are more top programs. But like I had NC State on here, and this has been on here, I think, since 2022.
So what I can do for you is, yeah, I'm meeting Dr. Tao Pang, who's the program director of NC State. So
Mhm.
I'm having a podcast with him soon, in few days actually. He just confirmed. So I'll actually, ask him to give you. I mean, I can request him to give you the data because like it's like a small cohort, and he's
Yeah.
like very transparent with things and stuff like that. Because I have spoken with him multiple times when I was in my university, and he's like very transparent. So he used to actually tell us the right things, what the industry wants. Really, I mean, I cannot tell you, he knows what the folks want in the industry, and he's doing just the same. So I'll try to ask him to maybe participate in your call, I mean, in your ranking system. And I know it's not a ranking system, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird thing to tell people. I'm like, I do rankings, but it's not really a ranking,
but
you know? But
so
yeah, it's rankings are just so hard to do. And so I think a lot of people, like as I mentioned in the podcast, like I don't want people to take away like, oh, QuantNet's awful and it's not good. It's great because you can get data from it, but it's also important, I think, to look at those issues, those attributes and kind of things that could be wrong with the data or could be wrong with the program.
yeah, no, no, thanks, Dimitri. Actually, honestly, I mean, I guess there are a lot of folks who have reached out to me on LinkedIn, and everyone is like, how to get into Baruch or how to get into Columbia, Carnegie Mellon, and I'm like, have you seen their curriculum? Is it something what you want to pursue? And they're like, no, 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 we just want to go into the top-notch school and stuff like that. So that's where I say, no, no, you need to stop. You need to go and check out the curriculum. But I guess this kind of podcast really helped a lot of folks. I know a lot of Indians who they follow you blindly, whatever you say, it's like if Dimitri has said something, that's gonna be right. So I'm sure like this podcast will really help them understand.
Yeah, I have an interview coming out with Carnegie Mellon
Oh,
on
okay.
with their admissions director. So we'll go
Really?
ahead. Yeah, so I'll get into a little bit more details on it because I think like as you're mentioning too, one of the hard parts with it is looking at a program is are you a good fit for the program?
Hmm.
And as the rankings show, right, if my GPA is X and my test scores are this, I should get accepted. And then students are shocked when they go, I got rejected from every program. Like it makes no sense. But they miss the softer piece of quant, which is like how do you communicate complex ideas? Why are you in the industry? I don't think any program will admit it to you, but I think many programs realize like the pharma bro, like, I've got to make a ton of money, kind of Wall Streety attitude is really off-putting. And, even if you work at a big fund, even these guys, I'm like, oh, you work for this huge hedge fund, like you're going to be like obnoxious and annoying. I'll meet them and I'm like, oh, they're really interesting and they're really smart. And it's like they're not the personality you see on the internet,
Right.
which I think our channels are like challenging because like we're just normal quants doing, math and stats and finance and it's exciting. But I think a lot of students miss that too on the applications is making sure when you're going to apply to these programs that like show who you are, like show that you're unique, show that you're really wanting to be in the industry. Don't be like super like, I don't know, like you're gonna somehow like change the world of trading and algorithms. You're gonna be a billionaire. I don't know. It drives me nuts. I've asked programs about it and they like don't really want to answer the question. But I think everybody deep down has the insight that like this person is not going to be easy to place,
Right.
in a job.
Yeah. So last question, Dimitri, from my end. Any last advices to any student who's planning to apply? Is it worth coming to US to pursue masters in quant finance? Because as I said, a lot of money is at stake. So, always a very tough decision, like whether should I pay that $100,000 money, or, there are few programs who also have like $50,000, $60,000. So like any takes on that, like any last advices or anything to students? Yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking for programs, there's a few things to consider. I think US market is king. I
Yep.
know Europe hates when I say this. US market is king. It pays the most. It typically is the most interesting work. Uh, it's just how it is. Like we're just more capitalistic than other continents, so we tend to get just better comp. I had friends in Europe, for example. They have these pay scales with numbers, and you have to fit in these boxes, and like the comp's super low. I don't know. I know it's hard for them to leave. A lot of them mention like it's hard to leave family, or you don't want to leave everybody behind, and then you go to the US. But I think if you're really wanting an interesting quantitative finance job, I don't think there's anywhere else better to go than the US. I've had friends go to Canada
Yeah.
and then they complain they can't get a job in the US, and then they end up getting a second master's in the US. Your time is money. So I would, if you're serious about it, I would come to the US, bite the bullet. Cost of living is expensive, the tuition is expensive. I would go that path. When you do the applications, the other piece of advice I'd say is, definitely look at the big names because they're probably a big name for a reason and apply to those programs that align with you. But I would also apply at some of the mid to lower ranking ones online. One, because most other people aren't going to be applying there. So you'll get an acceptance more likely. The other piece, kind of as you mentioned too, right, is the tuition might be significantly lower. But the weird thing that I've noticed is that some of the programs offer scholarships, but they don't tell you that.
Yeah.
So it might be $100,000 program that's coming in at 50. So that is a good opportunity, I think, to apply to the big name programs. But realize you're kind of weighing the options of do I go to a big program with really expensive tuition in a really expensive city like New York City, or do I go to a smaller program with cheaper? The weight there is going to be you're going to save a bunch of money in tuition, but it might be harder to find a job.
Right.
So I would consider that when you go through the process. Um, Ask the programs for students or alumni contact information to talk to. I mean, it doesnn't beat like NC State. You can contact you and say, like, what do you think of the program? How is the career placement? How is the coursework? I would do that at a few different programs you get acceptance to, because that will also help you kind of figure out like all right, this program might not be for me, or like this program sounds like it has great job placement, even though it's cheap. So I can save, $50,000 a year in tuition, plus the cost of living is cheaper. So I would try to do a research on the sense of not looking at the rankings, but really going out and talking to students and realizing you're kind of there's no right answer, right? There's pros and cons of, do you want to spend it? I would argue if you do pay a lot of tuition and you get a job in quant finance, it'll all pan out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it is rough. It's hard to have that much debt and go through the process. But I think in the long run, in the United States at least, that investment will break even. If not, if you go to a good program that is academically rigorous and you end up not getting a job, you made a good decision because you should be able to find a job in tech or in something adjacent to it, at least to get started, as long as you had good education. If you just went to a really, really big name school and Wall Street thinks you're amazing and you can't find a job in Wall Street, then you're kind of screwed because there's no one
Yeah.
else is going to go like, oh, this is a great education. So I would kind of take those into consideration when you're looking at applications.
Okay. Okay. But yeah, Dimitri, that's all I had. I mean, I guess I also got a lot of clarity of how you do the ranking versus how other website does the ranking. And definitely thank you so much for coming in and showing, I mean, sharing your experience. So really, really means a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Dimitri. Thank you for joining in.